15 years, my modest 3-bedroom house had been my sanctuary. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple place with a big backyard that backed up to a beautiful creek that cut through our properties. That creek was the main reason I bought the house in the first place. Every morning, I'd sit on my back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight dance across the water. My kids grew up splashing in that creek during hot summer days, catching tiny fish with their nets, and building little rock dams that would wash away with the next rain. We even had a small wooden dock where my daughter and I would sit with our fishing poles, rarely catching anything but always enjoying our time together. That creek was more than just water flowing through my property. It was where some of my family's best memories were made. When old Mr. Davis, who owned the house next door, decided to move to a retirement community, I was sad to see him go. He was the kind of neighbor everyone wants, quiet, respectful, and always willing to lend a hand when needed. We'd often share gardening tips over the fence or have pleasant conversations about the weather while tending to our yards. He knew every inch of our properties and confirmed multiple times that the property line ran right down the middle of the creek, giving us both equal access to the water. I even had the original survey from when I purchased my home that clearly showed I owned half the creek bed. "You make sure whoever buys this place knows about that creek boundary," Mr. Davis told me before he left. "Some folks these days don't respect property lines like they should." I nodded and promised I would, not realizing how prophetic his words would be. About a month after Mr. Davis moved out, a moving truck pulled up next door. I watched from my kitchen window as a sleek black luxury SUV followed behind it. The new owner stepped out wearing what looked like an expensive suit, talking loudly on his cell phone about some business deal. I decided to give him a few days to settle in before introducing myself. 3 days later, I walked over with a homemade apple pie, my grandmother's recipe, and knocked on the door. The man who answered was probably in his mid-40s, with perfectly styled hair and a watch that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Hi there," I said with my most welcoming smile. "I'm your next-door neighbor. Just wanted to come by and introduce myself and bring you a little welcome gift." He looked at the pie, then at me, with an expression that fell somewhere between confusion and indifference. "Thanks," he said, taking the pie without much enthusiasm. "I'm pretty busy with work calls, but nice to meet you." He didn't offer his name, and before I could say anything else, he was already closing the door. Not exactly the warm welcome I'd hoped for, but I figured maybe he was just stressed from the move. A week later, I was working from home when I heard the unmistakable sound of construction equipment coming from next door. Curious, I walked out to my backyard and saw 3 workers setting up what looked like fence posts that extended all the way across the creek. My heart sank. I immediately walked over to the property line where a man in a hard hat appeared to be supervising the work. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about the property line. The boundary actually runs down the middle of the creek." The supervisor looked uncomfortable and gestured toward the house. "You'll have to talk to the homeowner. We're just following the plans he gave us." As if on cue, my new neighbor emerged from his back door, still talking on his cell phone. When he saw me, he reluctantly ended his call and walked over. "Is there a problem?" he asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "Yes, actually. The fence you're building is crossing over onto my property. The boundary line runs down the middle of the creek. I have the survey to prove it." He scoffed, looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Look, I paid good money for this property, and my plans show this is all mine. I'm putting up a privacy fence around the entire perimeter." "But that's not correct," I insisted, trying to remain polite. "I've lived here for 15 years. I have the original survey and—" "I don't have time for this," he interrupted, checking his watch. "I have an important call in 5 minutes. My real estate agent showed me where the property ends, and that's where I'm building my fence. But the fence will block my access to half the creek that legally belongs to me," I explained, feeling my temperature rising. "My family uses the creek regularly. Plus, building a fence through a waterway might not even be legal due to environmental regulations." He looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. "Environmental regulations? It's just a little creek. Listen, no offense, but I've spent a lot of money upgrading this property, and I don't want to look out my windows and see your—" He paused, glancing dismissively at my modest yard situation. "The fence is going up. End of discussion. Could we at least look at both our surveys together? I'm sure we can work this out reasonably," I suggested. "I've got a conference call with Tokyo in a few minutes. Some of us have actual important jobs," he said with a smirk. "If you have a problem, talk to my lawyer." With that, he turned and walked back into his house, leaving me standing there, stunned by his rudeness. I went home and immediately dug out my property documents. There it was in black and white. The survey clearly showed the property line running down the middle of the creek. I took photos of the documents and then walked down to the creek to take pictures of the fence posts already being installed directly through the water. The workers had placed sandbags to divert the water flow while they worked, which was already causing the creek to back up slightly on my side. That night, I barely slept. The sound of the creek had always been soothing, helping me drift off to sleep, but now it reminded me of what I stood to lose. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let some arrogant newcomer take what rightfully belonged to me, especially something as meaningful as our family's beloved creek. The next day was Saturday, and I noticed my elderly neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Miller, working in her garden. She had lived in the neighborhood even longer than I had, close to 30 years. "Good morning," I called out, walking over to her neat yard full of colorful flowers. "How are you today?" "Oh, just fine, dear," she replied with a warm smile. "Just trying to get these petunias in before it gets too hot. How are you? I noticed some commotion at the old Davis place yesterday." I sighed and explained the situation with the new neighbor and the fence. Mrs. Miller shook her head in disapproval. "That creek boundary has been established for decades. When my late husband and I moved here in the 90s, the developer was very clear about the creek being a shared boundary. In fact," she paused, thinking, "I believe I still have some of the original neighborhood development plans in my attic. My husband was on the community board back then and kept everything. Would those help you?" "They might," I said, feeling a spark of hope. "That would be incredibly helpful." 2 hours later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with Mrs. Miller's dusty folder of neighborhood development plans from 1987. Sure enough, they clearly showed the creek as a natural boundary between properties, with the line running directly down the middle. Even better, there was a notation about riparian rights to be equally maintained for all creek-adjacent properties. I wasn't entirely sure what riparian rights meant, but it sounded important. On Monday morning, I called in sick to work and scheduled an appointment with a real estate attorney. The receptionist mentioned they had an opening that afternoon with one of their partners who specialized in property disputes and environmental law. The law office was in a modest building downtown, nothing fancy but professional. The attorney, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose, listened carefully as I explained the situation and spread out my documents on her desk, my property survey, Mrs. Miller's development plans, and the photos I'd taken of the fence construction. "Well," she said after examining everything, "you definitely have a strong case here. The property line clearly runs down the middle of the creek, but there's actually more to this than just a boundary dispute." She turned to her computer and typed something. "Let me show you something." She swiveled her monitor so I could see it. "This is from our state's Environmental Protection Code. Waterways like your creek are subject to special regulations. You can't just build structures through them without proper permits and environmental impact studies. Based on these photos, I doubt your neighbor has obtained the necessary approvals. So, what do we do?" I asked, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "First, we'll send a formal cease and desist letter, citing both the property line encroachment and the potential environmental violations. We'll request that all construction halt immediately until the dispute is resolved. Then, we'll file complaints with the county environmental office and the building permit department." She looked at me with a serious expression. "I should warn you, this might get contentious. Your neighbor sounds like someone who isn't used to being told no. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my kids and how much that creek meant to our family. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared." True to the attorney's prediction, things did get contentious. The cease and desist letter was delivered the next day, and that evening, there was a loud knock on my door. I opened it to find my neighbor standing there, red-faced and waving the letter. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, shaking the paper. "You're threatening to sue me?" "I'm not threatening anything," I replied calmly. "I'm simply enforcing my property rights and pointing out that your fence violates environmental regulations." "This is ridiculous. I've already spent thousands on this fence." "I tried to tell you about the property line before you started building," I reminded him. "You wouldn't listen." "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, his voice rising. "I'm a senior vice president at the regional bank. I don't have time for petty neighborhood squabbles." "This isn't petty," I said, standing my ground. "That creek is half mine, and what you're doing is illegal." "We'll see about that," he snapped. "My lawyer will bury yours." With that, he stormed back to his house. The next morning, I noticed a security camera had been installed on the corner of his house, pointed directly at my property. A few days later, a police officer showed up at my door, explaining they'd received a noise complaint about my property. Since my family and I had been unusually quiet that week, trying to avoid any interaction with our neighbor, it was obvious who had made the false report. Meanwhile, construction on the fence continued, though at a slightly slower pace. My lawyer had filed complaints with the county offices, but bureaucracy moved slowly. The fence was almost complete, a 6-foot-tall monstrosity made of dark composite material that now stretched completely across the creek. They had installed a section directly through the water using concrete footings that disrupted the natural flow, causing a small pool to form on my side. My kids were devastated. My daughter, who was 12, asked me tearfully if we could still fish in our creek. My 9-year-old son couldn't understand why someone would be so mean as to take away part of our backyard. Their reactions strengthened my resolve to fight this injustice. 2 weeks after filing the complaints, we received notice that county environmental inspectors would be coming to assess the situation. The day before their scheduled visit, we had the heaviest rainstorm of the season. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of rushing water and went to look out my back window. The creek had swelled considerably, and the water was backing up behind the fence, which was acting like a dam. My yard was starting to flood. I threw on a raincoat and boots and went outside with a flashlight. The water was already several inches deep in parts of my yard, and as I watched, I could see the fence starting to buckle under the pressure of the backed-up creek. I quickly took video and photos on my phone, documenting the flooding and the obvious cause, the illegal fence. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the damage was evident. Parts of my yard were muddy and littered with debris from the creek, and a small section of the fence had partially collapsed, allowing the backed-up water to finally rush through. It was awful to see my yard in such a state, but I knew it provided powerful evidence for our case. When the environmental inspectors arrived later that day, they were accompanied by someone from the county building permit office. They spent over an hour examining the fence, taking measurements, photos, and water samples. I provided them with my documentation and showed them the video and photos from the night before. "This is a clear violation of county waterway regulations," the environmental inspector told me, shaking his head. "And building a structure this size without proper permits is a separate violation." "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll be issuing citation notices for multiple violations," the building inspector said. "Your neighbor will have 30 days to remedy the situation or face daily fines." Sure enough, 3 days later, my neighbor received official violation notices from both county departments. That evening, I was working in my front yard when a luxury car I hadn't seen before pulled into his driveway. A man in an expensive suit, who I assumed was his lawyer, got out and went inside. About an hour later, both men came out to the backyard and stood looking at the fence, gesturing animatedly. I could tell from their body language that the conversation wasn't going well. The next day, my attorney called with news. "Your neighbor's lawyer reached out to propose a settlement," she said. "They're offering to modify the fence to allow water flow, but they want to keep it on its current path." "That's not acceptable," I replied. "The fence is on my property and is damaging the creek ecosystem. I want it removed entirely from the waterway." "I agree," she said. "I'll convey that to them." The settlement offer was rejected, and a week later, we filed a formal lawsuit for property encroachment, environmental damage, and loss of enjoyment of property. The legal document detailed every aspect of the dispute, including the property line evidence, the environmental violations, and the damage caused by the recent flooding. My neighbor's response was to file a countersuit, claiming that I had misrepresented the property line and that he had relied on information from his real estate agent. It was a desperate move, especially since we had solid documentation, but it showed he wasn't going to back down easily. As the court date approached, my attorney suggested we try to find the original surveyor who had mapped out the properties when the neighborhood was first developed. Through Mrs. Miller's connections with former community board members, we managed to locate the now retired surveyor, who agreed to provide a sworn statement confirming that the creek had always been the natural boundary between properties, with a line running down its center. 3 months after the fence was first erected, we had our day in court. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, but it felt intimidating nonetheless. My neighbor sat with his attorney on one side, looking confident in an expensive suit. I sat with my attorney on the other, nervous but determined. The judge, an older woman with stern eyes but a patient demeanor, listened carefully as both sides presented their cases. My attorney methodically laid out our evidence, the property surveys, the development plans, the retired surveyor's statement, the environmental violation reports, and photos of the flooding caused by the fence. My neighbor's attorney argued that his client had acted in good faith based on information provided by his real estate agent and that removing the fence would cause undue financial hardship. When the judge asked if they had obtained proper permits for building a structure through a waterway, the attorney fumbled, eventually admitting they had not. The environmental inspector testified about the damage to the creek ecosystem and the flooding risk posed by the fence. Mrs. Miller spoke about the historical understanding of the property boundaries in the neighborhood. Even my daughter testified briefly, describing what the creek meant to our family and how the fence had affected us. When it was my neighbor's turn to speak, his arrogance was on full display. "Your Honor, I'm a busy professional who made a significant investment in improving my property. This dispute is being driven by envy from someone who simply doesn't want to look at a fence that's nicer than anything on their property." I could see the judge's expression harden at his condescending tone. After all testimony concluded, the judge took a brief recess to review the evidence. When she returned, her decision was clear. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I find that the property line does indeed run down the center of the creek, as shown in the original survey and confirmed by multiple sources," she began. The defendant has unlawfully encroached on the plaintiff's property and violated county environmental regulations by constructing a fence through a protected waterway without proper permits. She looked directly at my neighbor. The court orders that the fence be completely removed from the creek bed within 30 days. Additionally, the defendant must pay for professional environmental restoration of the creek to its original condition, as determined by the county environmental office. My heart soared as she continued. Furthermore, the defendant will pay all legal fees incurred by the plaintiff in this matter, as well as damages for loss of enjoyment of property in the amount of $15,000. The defendant's countersuit is dismissed with prejudice. She gave my neighbor a stern look. In the future, sir, I suggest you research property boundaries before building structures and consult with neighbors who might be affected by your plans. It would save everyone a great deal of time and money. My neighbor's face had turned an alarming shade of red, but there was nothing he could do. The judge's decision was final. Exactly 32 days later, my neighbor had requested a 2-day extension, which the court granted. A crew arrived to remove the section of fence that crossed the creek. I sat on my back porch, pretending to read a book but actually watching with quiet satisfaction as they dismantled the expensive structure. My neighbor stayed inside his house the entire time, though I occasionally caught glimpses of him watching from an upstairs window. The environmental restoration team arrived the following week. They carefully removed the concrete footings that had been poured into the creek bed and worked to restore the natural flow of the water. They even added some native plants along the banks to help prevent erosion. The transformation was remarkable. The creek looked even better than before. With the $15,000 in damages, I decided to make some improvements to our backyard oasis. We rebuilt the old wooden dock with more durable materials, added a small stone patio with comfortable seating near the creek, and installed solar-powered lights that illuminated the water with a gentle glow in the evenings. My kids were overjoyed to have their creek back, and we celebrated with a backyard barbecue for the neighbors who had supported us through the ordeal. Mrs. Miller was the guest of honor, and as we sat by the creek enjoying dessert, she leaned over and whispered, "You know, word about this has spread all over the neighborhood. That man tried to join the country club last month, and I heard they quietly discouraged his application. Nobody likes a bully who doesn't respect boundaries." As for my neighbor, he became noticeably less arrogant after the court case. The security camera pointed at my yard mysteriously disappeared, and he installed a much more reasonable fence that stayed well away from the creek. He still rarely spoke to anyone in the neighborhood, but at least the hostile behavior stopped. About 6 months after the court case, I was surprised to find an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a brief note. "I was wrong about the property line and the fence. Sorry for the trouble." It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. It wasn't much of an apology, but it was something. These days, I still start every morning with coffee by the creek, watching the sunlight dance on the water. My daughter and I still fish from our new dock, still rarely catching anything but always cherishing our time together. Sometimes, when I look at the water flowing freely through both our properties, I feel a sense of pride that I stood up for what was right, not just for myself and my family, but for the natural environment we're privileged to share. The creek continues to be the heart of our home, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and that sometimes, justice flows as surely as water finding its natural path. The next one is entitled People Story. My husband, 27, and I, 27, got together on October 16, 2022. He moved from Florida to Kansas to be with my son and I. A few months ago we found out that I can't have more kids and I'm actually scheduled for a medically necessary hysterectomy early 2025. Well, today my husband's ex called me. I didn't know it was her until I answered, and she told me that her 2-year-old daughter is my husband's. She was conceived 2 months before my husband and I got together. She's in Florida. I'm not able to move to Florida due to my son's dad living here. I feel like the only option at this point is divorce. I won't leave my son behind to move to Florida, and I would never expect my husband to stay in Kansas and not be there to raise his daughter. I can't explain the amount of sad I am. I never in a million years saw this coming. And I don't even know what to do at this point. Update: we talked with and hired an attorney yesterday. She will be served more than likely this week, and we will first schedule the paternity test. If it comes back that he's the father, then they will determine custody and child support. He said it should be a very quick process as Florida is a 50-50 state and it's extremely rare for a judge to even consider negotiating with either party as long as both parents seem fit, especially with him not knowing these past 2 years and him having it in writing that she never planned to tell him out of spite. He said the judge will have little to no sympathy for anything she says. The attorney said the most likely and typically scenario he sees in situations like this are his daughter will spend 1 week in the spring, 5 weeks in the summer, and 2 weeks in the fall with us in Kansas. And every other holiday. He said there will not be any need to relocate. Final update: for now, so much was uncovered today, and if you guys thought the situation was Seuss before, man, you're in for a surprise. But as of this evening the case is officially open and a summons has been issued. So I'm going to stay quiet until this is over just in case. Once everything is finalized, no matter how it may be finalized, I will create a new thread with an actual final update. Thank you everyone for the kind words and advice. We shall see what happens from here. If you saw my original post, here's the current update. If you have not, feel free to check it out for a full understanding. It's been a roller coaster the last 3 months, but by, hopefully, next week, we will have official answers. DNA tests were done yesterday. They said results typically take 3 to 5 business days, but since they were done in 2 different states, expect closer to 5 to 8 business days. In the last 3 months, there have been a million new things come out and a million different stories. Her and my husband had talked quite a bit until crap hit the fan recently. Her and I also talked quite a bit for a while. All friendly. She would text or call us frequently and my husband and I agreed to keep peace since she could potentially be a big part of our lives for a long time. Turns out she did tell my husband she was pregnant prior to him and I getting together. She said the baby was probably not his. He asked if they could meet up and talk, and a couple days later, she texted him saying she had an abortion. They did not talk again after the conversation regarding her terminating the pregnancy. She admitted to me she did go to a consult at an abortion clinic, scheduled the abortion for the next day, and then decided against it, but, what she told me, decided she was going to tell him she went through with it because she felt they wouldn't be able to co-parent well. The daughter has another man's last name and that man is on the birth certificate even though she has told my husband over a dozen times in the past 3 months that she has always known the daughter was my husband's. There's a ton more but I don't want to make this post 6 hours long. My husband's attorney has sent in proposed orders already in the case that paternity comes back positive. That way they can jump right into it. In his proposed orders, he put in 50-50 legal and physical custody until she starts school, after a few months of visitations to let the daughter get to know my husband, with my husband flying with child both ways. No child support if granted 50-50 physical custody. No back child support as she has said multiple times that she never intended on telling him he has a child and since there was another guy supporting the child these last 2 years, per her, he is still active in the child's life, even though they aren't together. Husband carries child on health insurance, husband's name goes on birth certificate, and daughter's last name changed to my husband's name. His attorney has also talked about filing paternity fraud charges against her since she has stated many times that she has always known. She just didn't want to co-parent with him so she chose to put a different guy on the birth certificate which caused my husband to miss out on 2 years of his, potential, child's life. If paternity comes back negative, his attorney is requesting she pays us back all legal fees due to frivolous litigation. My emotions are insane right now waiting on these results. I of course would love and accept the child if she is my husband's. She would be accepted into our family immediately and treated and loved the same as my biological child. But the ex has texted my husband about how much she still loves him, how she always will, how she just wants one-on-one time with him so they can try to reconnect. She has also texted and called me many times saying she feels bad our marriage has to end. It isn't going to end. She's going to be a tough one to co-parent with if the child is his. But that's not the child's fault, and no matter what, we will get through it. Paternity tests are back. 0% probability my husband is the father. The next one is entitled People Story. Hi, I searched for family advice forum and found here. Making the title for this gave me trouble. It doesn't really give the whole explanation of what I found. Also, English is not my first language and I might make mistakes so I'm sorry. Thank you for reading. My family, dad, mom, older brother and sister, me, moved to US when I was 17 after bad conditions in our home country. We all had to learn English and get jobs. I learned programming for a skill and now work in IT. I do database maintenance and some other things, for a company. My parents are not very good with computers so I help when they have any problems. My dad, 50, is small business owner now with another man. It's a shoe shop in our city. He uses his laptop for work stuff and yesterday it got viruses. I looked to fix it and I saved his data and removed virus, but I found his virus was from porn site material. He had many porn downloaded and saved, hundreds of files. This is a problem because also with the porn he has many photographs of shoes and feet. These are taken inside his shop. I have been in it and recognized the place, and they are shoes he sells there. They include women's feet who are trying shoes in the shop. I know this isn't porn but the actual porn is also mostly feet and shoes, but sexual. Like the women are naked. Since I saw this I think now that maybe he has an inappropriate behavior or intention at work because he relates shoes to sex. I mean that the customers don't know he thinks this way of it or that he photographs their feet. I'm concerned about this. My question is what should I do with what I found? I thought of 3 options and if you can give advice, it would help a lot. 1. I tell him what I found and ask about it. 2. I tell my mom and ask her to talk to him. 3. I tell his business partner. Maybe there is more options I don't know yet so if you guys have any other ideas, please let me know. Maybe I'm making mountains out of molehills, and if this is true, also tell me that. Also, my family needs his income from his business. He would have to find another job if he quit. But I don't know if he would quit just because I found it. I don't know. I'm confused. Update: hi. I know I posted this months in the past. Things are very different now. I remembered the post and thought I should tell the forum what happened. This month my parents will finalize their divorce. My dad has lied to my mom a lot about the matters of the first post. I took the advice to tell my mom about the pictures I found on my dad's laptop. Summary: while removing a virus, I discovered he had photos and video of women's feet inside the shoe store he runs. The opinion of the forum was he has foot fetish and should not be practicing it at work with unknowing people. Many people said I should tell my mother. So I told her, and I remember when I told her she had weird reaction. She said, "Oh God, he still does it?" It turns out she caught him having these pictures in the past. She told me that 2 years ago when she caught him trying to cheat through emails, it was asking for pictures of feet. After that she searched the rest of his phone and found feet pictures from the store. There were some pictures of shoes there that he masturbated on. When she saw these, she only told me and my sister that he tried to cheat, not the whole story. So until now that was all I knew. She continued to tell me more. After she caught him 2 years ago, she told him to stop cheating online, taking creepy pictures of customers, and masturbating with shoes he sold. She started to look at his phone sometimes since then to check and hadn't seen anything bad. But I realized it's because he uploads photos to the cloud, deletes from phone, then saves to his laptop. She doesn't have access to the laptop, so she never finds it. That was the first part of my mother's story. She was very upset to realize he kept doing it and hides it. I asked should we warn his business partner because maybe he can make him stop. From your advice I also told her about legal problems are possible. But she started to cry and said if he still does it, then his partner does too. His partner has the same fetish. That's the second part of her story. What happened was, when she discovered all the stuff 2 years ago, she asked why he does it and he denied doing anything a lot at first but then said it's a side business. They both take these pictures of people's feet who don't know and then sell them on the internet. I guess guys on the internet with this fetish buy candid photos of feet. In his shop is easy place to take those pictures together and make a lot of money. He got angry at her and said he knew she wouldn't like it, but we need the money. If you remember, my family was poor immigrants, and she should thank him. He believed he didn't hurt anyone. My mom told him it was the wrong way to make extra money and thought they, or at least he, stopped it. Because after that she didn't see more pictures. She never told anyone about this. Only me because I brought it up after my last post. She feels a lot of shame and disgust. She blames herself for not noticing and not being more strict at the time. She also blames herself for not paying attention to his fetish in the past, and seeing the red flag. They were arranged marriage at a young age, and in our home country it was hard life. Sometimes we were in danger, so with these things his fetish was not the big problem and she didn't notice it often. Then when we came here and he took work at the shoe shop, and then became co-owner, and she found the pictures, then she saw signs in the past that he had foot fetish problem. It was too late because he had the job and supported our family. After we talked she realized what has been going on the whole time. He and his partner never stopped. The next month, we tried to convince him to stop and suggested therapy. This was another advice my first post got. He refused therapy and kept hiding pictures. Because of the dishonesty and shame, my mother was led to divorce. She can't trust him. She told her lawyer what he does. I don't know what will happen, but there is an investigation. Financially, I think we will be okay. My older brother, who lived in another state, transferred here to help support mom. His company employs him here now. My older sister also got another job. We will all support each other. I have to face the fact I never truly knew my dad. He was a good father and always wanted to protect us. I didn't know he did this too. He was strict, but good to me and my siblings, but not to my mother or other women. We still say he should try professional help. He denies. He pretends this never happened. He thinks my mom is going crazy. I can't change that, but I hope he'll get better one day. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.